Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some words just feel more natural to say, or why certain sounds just fit better in our mouths? Well, today we're diving into a fascinating study about how the soundiness of words, called sonority, might actually influence where we put stress when we speak. This paper explores a really cool idea in language. Is there a pattern to how we stress words? And does the actual sound of the letters play a role? Think about it. We know that in languages like Portuguese, which this study focuses on, stress often falls on the last syllable if it is heavy and on the second to last syllable if it is light. But this study asks if there is something more going on, something about the specific sounds at the end of words. The researchers here were curious about something called sonority. In simple terms, sonority is how much a sound vibrates from the chest up. Vowels are super sonorous, buzzing with energy. Nasal sounds like N and are pretty sonorous too. But sounds like S or P are much less sonorous, more like a hiss or a pop. They suspected that these soundier or more sonorous sounds at the end of a word might make us want to stress that word's final syllable more than less sonorous sounds. So how did they test this idea? They did something pretty clever. They created made-up words called nonce words that don't exist in Portuguese. This is important because they didn't want people to rely on existing words they already know. They created these fake words with different sound endings. Some ended with sonorous sounds like NL or R like in bam, pal, or car, and others ended with less sonorous sounds like S like in gas or bus. Then they presented these made-up words to native Portuguese speakers. They used two main methods. One was an auditory task where people heard two versions of the same made-up word and they had to pick the one that sounded better or more natural to them. The only difference between the two versions was where the stress was placed. The other method was an orthographic task, where people saw the made-up word written out with capital letters indicating where the stress should be, and they had to choose the version that felt right. And here is where it gets really interesting. They found that when the made-up words ended with those more sonorous sounds N, L, or R, people were much more likely to prefer that the stress fall on the very last syllable. But when the word ended with the less sonorous sound, people were less likely to choose final stress. It is like our mouths and ears just naturally prefer to give a little more oomph to words that end with those flowing sonorous sounds. This finding held up even when they looked at the data very closely, using some fancy statistical tools. They discovered a solid trend. Words ending in sonorant sounds, NLR, were more often stressed on the final syllable, whereas words ending in S were less likely to be. This suggests that it is not just about the length of the syllable, but about the quality of the sound at the very end. Now, a potential wrinkle in Portuguese is that the plural form of many words is made by adding in sound. So, does the preference for final stress on sonorant codas and less on S codas actually reflect a grammatical rule instead of a pure sound preference? The researchers considered this. They did a few things to check. They told the participants that the nonce words were singular objects to try and avoid the plural association. They also looked at real Portuguese words that are not plural and end in S, and found similar patterns. Monomorphemic words ending in S were less likely to have final stress in the real language too, which supported their findings from the made-up words. They even showed a graph comparing how often words ending in is get final stress in their experiment versus how often real single-meaning words ending in is get final stress in the Portuguese dictionary. And guess what? The pattern was the same. Words ending in is are less likely to grab the final stress compared to words ending in sonorants. This is a strong indication that their findings aren't just a fluke of their made-up words but reflect a real tendency in the language. So, what does all this mean? It suggests that sonority, the inherent buzziness or resonance of speech sounds, can indeed play a role in how speakers of a language, like Portuguese, decide where to put emphasis or stress. It is like our brains are unconsciously tuned to the acoustic properties of sounds, and this influences our linguistic choices. It's a clear example of how the physical properties of sound can shape the abstract rules of language. This study is pretty significant because it is one of the first to experimentally test this idea of sonority-driven stress, specifically with sounds at the end of words, called codas. While other studies have looked at sounds at the beginning of words or differences in vowel sounds, this research zeroes in on those final consonant sounds and provides hard evidence that they matter for stress placement. It adds a crucial piece to the puzzle of what makes a word sound right to native speakers. One thing to note is that these effects were strongest at the very end of the word, This makes sense because in Portuguese, like in many languages, the end of the word is often a key area for determining stress. The researchers also mentioned that there might be some weaker effects happening inside the word, but the evidence for that wasn't as strong in this particular study, leaving room for future research. It is great that the researchers were thinking about ethical considerations, getting approval from an ethics committee, and ensuring participants understood the experiment. This is super important in any research involving people, and it is always good to see support for this kind of foundational research from organizations like the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. It shows that understanding the nuances of language is seen as valuable. And of course, the authors declare no competing interests, which means they're presenting their findings openly without any hidden agendas. Now, what is my take on this? I think it is a fantastic illustration of how deeply ingrained the physical properties of sound are in our language system. It's not just arbitrary rules, there are often perceptual and articulatory reasons behind them. The fact that they used nonce words and checked against real words is a robust way to make sure they were really capturing a phonological principle and not just some quirk of memory or grammar. What would I love to see next? It would be fascinating to see if this sonority effect holds true in other languages, especially those with different stress systems or different sets of final consonants. Are there languages that actively avoid final stress and sonorous codas for some reason? That would be a really interesting contrast. Also, exploring if different types of sonorants have even finer-grained effects could be a next step. For example, does an M sound behave differently from an L sound? This study confirms that language is incredibly complex and nuanced, and even the tiny details of how sounds are made can have big consequences for how we produce and perceive speech. It reminds us that the architecture of our minds is deeply connected to the physical world, including the mechanics of our own vocal tracts. So, what do you think? Does this explanation of sonority-driven stress make sense to you? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown interesting, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more explorations into the fascinating world of psychology and science. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next deep dive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.